It's not very often a new sandbox MMORPG launches in itself, but launching with intentions of capitalizing on the success in sandbox market dominated by EVE Online, that's even rarer. Albion Online launched just last year, 2017, in the summer, and since then I've got repeated questions on what my opinion is of the game, or have I played it? And the beauty and simplicity of this series is I get to answer those questions in my typical analytical fashion and publish it in a video for your enjoyment. As always, I will try to rely on actual game examples and key events to explain my point of view, but it is ultimately my opinion. If you disagree, good. Let me know in the comments below why. I'm not trying to convince anyone to play or not to play Albion Online, just offering my perspective. Let's waste no more time and get to it. Albion Online, which launched a little more than a year ago, enjoyed probably what most would label moderate success. But after a drop in players, some employee layoff, and the CEO leaving the company, momentum seems to have slowed for the game. Its recent launch on Steam confirms this, as Albion Online scores barely a C grade according to the reviews, and lost most of its new Steam population shortly after launch. Don't get it twisted, a hardcore, full loot MMO will always draw the ire of casual fans, and casual fans make up the majority of the market. It also won't really be a game that has the popularity in the same way that ESO, Guild Wars 2, or World of Warcraft does due to its nature. But the reason I don't play Albion Online is not at all based around there being full loot PvP, because I actually prefer such an experience, as it makes PvP matter and feel like there are more consequences. And I find it annoying that I have to mention this, but if you ever thought Albion wasn't going to be that sort of game, you were either desperate for a new MMO or just simply not paying attention. The issue with Albion Online is not that it's a full loot PvP sandbox, that's an actual feature or the very vision for the game. Now to take a step back a little bit, Albion Online was a Kickstarter MMO that managed to raise almost $10 million. Its first alpha was back in 2013, of many betas was back in 2014 and continued on to 2017. The game has been playable and in development for at least 4 years. The game back then was very different. I played Albion in alpha up until just after launch, so I got to see all of the changes firsthand. Some were good, but many were also bad. Beta 1 was quite honestly the best version of the game, and I say that because there were so many versions of Albion Online. Sandbox Interactive seemed to, and still seems to, struggle with their vision, and that's where most of my criticism of Albion Online starts. Sandbox Interactive came onto the scene with an ambitious idea to create a fantasy sandbox PvP game that took inspiration from EVE Online, but looked to work cross-platform on all mobile devices as well as PC. But these are both concepts that they sort of abandoned as the game was further developed. Let's start with Albion Online's core design in regards to the way it approaches player versus player, divides its zones, and its world design. It's not a secret that Albion Online doesn't have a depth of story or a huge world of lore to rest its laurels on. It's all about sandbox features, player interactions, and player-created content. Without players playing in the sand, there is essentially no game. The reason Beta 1 is often seen as the best form of Albion Online is because the map was actually designed to, well, be a map. Current map iteration feels more like a giant arena with some point of interest pasted on top of it. They got rid of choke points, they got rid of more tile diversity, more cities, and etc. By simplifying the map and creating a reputation system to discourage PKers, they really hamstrung their game for players not willing to just join massive Zergs. Yes, I think alignment or reputation systems in most games can be good ways to police players from being dicks or just endlessly ganking people. Except the initial design of Albion Online was about a couple different zones that got progressively more hardcore. You had blue zones, where you couldn't PK other players. This made sense because these were based around starter zones, with lower tier resources, safe zones so to say, which I have no issue with. Yellow zones allowed for the ability to flag and engage in PvP over mob camps, resources, and the like, but you didn't lose gear or your alignment wasn't affected. Red zones would be zones for smaller groups of PKers who wanted the ability to have full loot, increased tier rewards, and resources. Black zones would be much the same, but would focus more on larger groups as they had more larger objectives to claim, such as chests, cities, or watchtowers, as well as higher end PvE mobs. Sounds like a great and simple system, right? Well, this system was changed dramatically before launch, not just with the map changes I previously mentioned, which certainly hurt things as it made Zerging more effective due to no choke points and very little POIs on the map. But the biggest issue was the implementation of the reputation system based on alignment. So if you were a player who lived near red zones, PKing was expected in such zones, or at least the very chance for it. But with the implementation of the new system, it made it to where that if you wanted to player kill, defend a resource, or defend a group of players taking your mob spawn, if they were blue players, you essentially were hamstrung with your hands tied behind your back. Because if you killed those players, you suffered reputation loss and were unable to go back to most cities. So because you played the game on a core level as it was meant to be played, i.e. defending your mob spawns from encroaching players, you were heavily penalized. This had a domino effect, as it then forced PKers to live in black zones, which is strange considering black and red were so similar at one point, but the big issue with black zones was that they once again were dominated by Zerg clans, so small-scale PvP clans who lived in a red zone, who didn't even just needlessly gank, but one or two engagements with the blue players who weren't exactly lawful subjected them to go move to zones where they couldn't even compete. I'm speaking from personal experience. We started as a good alignment clan living near red zones. What we encountered was people who had blue or good alignments constantly trying to make us flag or pressuring us to make decisions to PK them. Whether through them having one or two players attack and force the rest of us to flag, whether it was through Hellgates, which were supposed to be for small scale but ended up being constantly zerged by large blue clans, to where small 5-man clans like myself even struggled to get into the 5v5 arena, which were kind of literally made for clans like ours. You start to see the problem. It's one thing to implement an alignment system, but what business does an alignment system have being in red zones where PvP is literally the point in some of these zones? Sure, certain objectives can flag you as neutral so you don't have to take the alignment hit, but they were constantly abused and players would constantly flag up or flag off to try and trick you into attacking them. When black becomes the only lawless zone and the majority of mechanics highly reward larger groups of players, it's not a surprise that these zones divulge into constant Zerg fighting, which is totally fine. Except that now all of the small groups of PvPers are also thrown into these black zones and eaten alive by the Zerg clans unless they join them. Before people say, well then don't PK, I will first pretend you didn't say that since it's largely a purpose of the game. Second, I will bring up a simple example. There are tiers of different alignments, and you each have a restriction until you eventually can only stay in black zones. This reputation system at first glance seems adequate to discourage random gankers and PKers, well except because of the limitations of Albion Online's system. Let's use a simple example to illustrate my point. I have a small group of 4 guys. We are in a red zone farming higher tier mobs. A group of non-flagged blues come upon us and notice us farming. They then proceed to compete against us to take the mob camps, splitting our XP and being less effective. My group is annoyed, so as we would in beta 1 version of the game, we start flagging to warn the group to go away. Except, that doesn't scare players. They want you to flag because then it means that they can attack you with no recourse reputation-wise, as well as just endlessly Zerg you and outnumber you. We wipe their group but take an alignment hit. Now we're stuck as flagged and attempt to make our way out of the dungeon to get back home to avoid PvP. Except now that we are flagged, we will constantly be defending ourselves against more and more blue players, theoretically, who continue to drive your alignment lower and lower. You can take this example and replace it with Hellgates, chests, or any of the POI map objectives that, although allow for flagging within certain zones, also encourage flag hopping. So next thing you know, the group of players I mentioned who were never intended to be evil or gank helpless players I penalized past the point of no return and can no longer live anywhere except Caerleon, which is, as you guessed it, now going to be dominated more heavily by large groups of Zerg clans. So what is this group's options? Go to the black zone? Sure, that's an option. And then proceed to be tripled in numbers and stamped out without much effort. This wouldn't be such a problem if those small clans of players could adequately differentiate themselves skill-wise, but Albion Online was designed for mobile devices. Its combat system is MOBA-like, but has none of the richness or mechanical ability present in most MOBAs. A MOBA can be about precisely clicking and reacting to moves, and having to constantly move. It takes a base level of mechanical ability to be good at it. There's a few reasons why the combat in Albion is so simplistic, mostly being the combat design is very rock, paper, scissors. It's unlikely certain builds, no matter how played differently, can compete against other builds. The reasons MOBAs can have this incredible skill ceiling is that the game is inherently more reaction-based and rewards players who are quick at timing things, have good aim, and superior knowledge. Say for example I am playing Fizz and a player attempts to stunlock me. I can use my ability to avoid his attack based on reaction and make a split-second judgment to escape or pursue my target. There are little to no moments like this in Albion Online, which is a big reason that the game is so boring to watch and, well, frankly play. Albion Online's combat system is so simplistic, it plays out slowly, that there's little room for someone of supreme talent to set themselves apart. Many abilities aren't skill shots, movement speed is slow, auto-attack buffering is not really rewarded nor encouraged. The solution to beating most players, or most groups of players, is simply bringing more players. Here's an example. In Darkfall Online, another PvP sandbox MMO, smaller groups of players could avoid larger groups of players through skill, awareness, and superior positioning. That's because fights with more numbers meant more chaos because there was friendly fire. There isn't friendly fire in Albion. There isn't really any choke points. There isn't really any reason not to respond to a threat by simply bringing more people. Take this as an example. A group of 5 guys engage with another group of 6 to 7 and win a fight looting their opposition. In some games, the losing group can make a build switch, refocus their team, and possibly come back and compete again. But why do that in Albion Online, when they can just contact their Mega Alliance to show up with 15 people? Which, by the way, has happened to me ad nauseum, to which they eventually catch up to the group, 15 versus 5, sure the 5 guys can fight valiantly, but because of a lack of skill ceiling, there isn't really a universe where those 5 players can reliably escape a skirmish or attempt to thin the numbers. And this is quite frankly, my largest issue with the game. Zerg-based games are quite common, EVE Online is inherently a Zerg-based game, but there's also plenty of content and things to do in EVE for the non-Zerg player. You can't accurately say the same for Albion. Because I previously outlined, PvPers are shoehorned eventually into black zones, which are dominated by Zergs. You can't design a game like this with no friendly fire, no ability for players of higher skill to demonstrate their higher skill level. When a Diamond player in League or Dota plays up against a Silver player, while the match might seem close at first glance, you quickly see a differentiation in skill as the Diamond player uses their superior knowledge, mechanics, and awareness to beat out his opponent. But in Albion Online, there isn't a mechanical skill ceiling nearly period, and knowledge isn't as important, because as mentioned, most issues can be solved by simply just bringing more people. This was all but backed up when a leading developer on Albion stated that the game was never intended for solo PvP, and that much is apparent. The reasons I think Albion Online have this very rudimentary combat system is simple. They built a game for a mobile platform. It simplified their gameplay, the speed of play, and basically the essence of the game. While players in EVE can feel unique for special ships, larger power creep, and superior knowledge, Albion Online devolves to who has the bigger group, and that's frankly speaking, its biggest travesty. Did you guys like or play Albion Online? What's your opinion of the game? Do you think I'm being fair in my criticism? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, let me know what game you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video and also support my content. If you want to support my content even more, you can head over to patreon.com/nerdSlayer. We've got some goals set up, we've got some reward tiers set up, and we even have an about blurb that details what we're going to be doing with the future of the channel. Anything's helpful, and you can donate as little as $1, which I will greatly appreciate. Thank you.